Climate change is affecting more and more regions of the world. We must unite and act now to become more resource efficient and reach the ambitious climate targets. We have started already, and more needs to be done. The responsibility for a sustainable future lies with each and everyone. Governments are taking action, and the economy is also adapting to climate change. Companies play an essential role in mitigating climate change. To measure each company's contribution, data is collected through the ESG questionnaire. This video tutorial will guide you through the main elements of the questionnaire. RBI, as your partner, will provide all the help you need for filling the ESG questionnaire. Additionally, RBI created a landing page for you where you can find further information to successfully complete the ESG questionnaire. The landing page provides you guidance and shows how to gather the information for the questionnaire. Each step will help to understand its objective and the information required. There are also examples and contact information in case you need further help. Here are some selected details. What is a greenhouse gas? A greenhouse gas contributes to the so-called greenhouse effect by absorbing infrared radiation. There are several gases, like carbon dioxide, methane, or nitrous oxide. The emissions of these are measured in terms of carbon dioxide equivalents. The Greenhouse Gas Equivalencies Calculator allows you to convert emissions to the equivalent amount of carbon dioxide. You can find this calculator within the ESG questionnaire. Your task in this step is to provide your greenhouse gas emissions of your organization's energy consumption. There are different scopes of emissions. Scope 1 emissions are all direct GHG emissions from the activities of your company or subsidiaries under your control, including fuel combustion on-site such as gas boilers, air conditioning leaks, and fleet vehicles. Scope 2 emissions are indirect GHG emissions from the generation of acquired and consumed electricity, steam, heat, or cooling, also known as electricity by the reporting entity. Scope 3 are indirect emissions that occur in your company's value chain. These are greenhouse gas emissions outside of your own production, from the goods you purchase to the distribution of the product you sell. All emissions that A, support your business, and B, are not Scope 1 and 2 are Scope 3 emissions. They come from purchased raw materials, transportation, customer usage, or capital goods, to name a few. Your organization is not emitting these emissions itself. A reporting company needs to calculate up and downstream emissions. Even if your organization is not emitting these emissions itself, you can use a systematic framework to calculate them. There are up to 15 categories. Some typical examples on Scope 3 emissions. Transportation. Your suppliers' and customers' transportation and distribution emissions, as well as your business travels and employee commuting. Capital goods. Your suppliers' and customers' GHG emissions from capital goods for processing or using your product. Energy. Suppliers' fuel and energy-related activities, or any energy consumption of leased assets. Waste. Generated in suppliers' operations and end-of-life treatment of your sold product. Let's do an exemplary calculation for a product manufacturer. For example, a dairy. Assign to Scope 1 all emissions that your company is burning directly for your manufacturing, like fuel for company cars, heating oil and gas for your buildings. Put under Scope 2 all emissions that you buy. Most of them are electricity or heating. Simplified, your power supply is on and your employees have it warm. Let's get to Scope 3. Remember, every additional indirect emission that is required in the value chain of your business. Scope 3 emissions are likely to be 80 to 90% of your emissions, so it is worth using a systematic framework for your calculations. They include both upstream and downstream emission-producing activities. Here are some examples for Scope 3 upstream emissions. The emissions caused by energy that is needed to produce the raw materials you use, or emissions caused by the fuel that is needed to deliver the raw materials, as long as they are not your own trucks. Also, add business travels and your employee commuting emissions to Scope 3. Examples for Scope 3 upstream emissions of a dairy are emissions of hay harvesting, emissions of production and transportation of bought milk for farmers, emissions from glass or plastic bottle manufacturing by a supplier, emission of waste treatment and recycling. Remember, these are all the emissions your product emits from raw inputs. Here are some examples for Scope 3 downstream emissions. Emission for energy that used to distribute your product to merchants and bring it to the end customer. Any emission that is related to the usage of the product by the end customer. Not to forget waste. Emissions which will arise when your product is treated appropriately at the end of its life cycle. And some examples for Scope 3 downstream emissions. Transportation emissions of dairy products to the retailers. Advertisement to market the various dairy brands. Recycling of milk bottles. Retail shop emissions. Remember, these are all emissions your product emits during its life cycle, including the final consumption and bottle recycling. Now, what are science-based targets? Targets are considered science-based if they are validated by the Science Based Targets initiative, SBTi. This means the targets are in line with what climate science deems necessary to limit global warming to well below 2 degrees C and pursuing efforts to limit warming to 1.5 degrees C. And recycling is the core of a circular economy, in which products are designed and processed with best possible reuse. It encourages sustainable consumption and maximum waste prevention. The input ideally consists of recycled or renewable raw materials for products and packaging. The whole process contains waste management and divides waste into 4 categories. Waste that is recycled, reused or recovered. Waste used for material recovery. Waste used for energy recovery. And special types of waste like plastic and hazardous waste. Following a circular economic process, the output will always consist of products that can be recycled or composted. The chapter Materials Information is about your company's waste, how much raw material your company uses, and the share of products that can be recycled or composted. The topics of packaging, energy conversion, hazardous waste, and the collection of plastic waste are also covered here. Here are a few specific examples on this topic. Recycling is the reprocessing of products or components of products that have become waste. They are prepared with new materials, products or substances, whether for the original or other purposes. Renewable raw materials like cornstarch, wood, cellulose are widely researched to produce fuels, chemicals, or biodegradable materials. These materials regrow in a reasonably short time. Recycled raw materials are raw materials that have been recovered from old products instead of producing raw material newly. Recovery, in this context, means products, components of products, or materials that have become waste and are later prepared to be reused. They are replacing new products, components, or materials. Energy recovery means operation and reprocessing into materials that are to be used as fuels. Material recovery is the utilization of manufactured goods to extract resources such as steel, copper, or plastics for further reuse. Your ESG data is an essential building block for the transition to sustainable finance. Thank you for your effort to get this done. As your partner, we will provide all the help you need to guide you through the ESG questionnaire.